Good day, everyone. I'm Amina Liman, and today I'm going to discuss about in defense of nation-state. A variety of arguments are made in defense of the nation-state. This includes that the nation-state continued to be a major player on the global stage, meaning that it continues to have at least some power in the face of globalization. Nation-states vary greatly in their focus in the face of globalization, and the rumors of the demise of nation-states are greatly exaggerated. For instance, Japan is a nation-state. Therefore, the question is, why is Japan a nation-state? Well, Japan is considered a nation since it has a defined area, a government, and a common culture among its citizens. In Japan, a nation-state expresses a common identity with its own people. It has national symbols such as a national flag and anthem, as well as a variety of national emblems. And Japan does play a significant role in globalization, particularly in their economy. And they are essentials in a worldwide market, particularly because Japan is known for its technological advancement. Indeed, aside from that, Japan has been the world's largest importer of liquefied natural gas for decades, or LNG. It has also been the largest net buyer of food items in the globe. The United States leads the world in agricultural imports, as well as agricultural capital equipment and related technology. Knowing all of this, it's difficult to imagine that their story will come to a conclusion, and that is just a hyperbole. The so-called Korean War boom prompted the economy to see a quick growth in production and marked the beginning of the economic miracle since Japan acquired power as a consequence of the Japanese economy recovery, as a result of the Dodge Plan's implementation and the commencement of the Korean War. The role of the state enduring and even increasing in advanced industrial societies, writes by Daniel Biland. Now, what is the role of the state in an advanced industrial society? To answer that topic, I believe it is important to establish four rather idealized viewpoints as a basis for discussion. I'd want to make a call. Classic liberal, libertarian socialist, state socialist, capitalist, and I want to consider each in turn. Also, I'd like to make my personal point of view apparent ahead of time so that you can better assess and judge what I'm saying. I think that libertarian socialist concepts, and by that I mean a range of thinking that spans from left-wing Marxism through anarchism, are fundamentally true and that they are logical and natural extensions of classical liberalism. Into the current era of modern industrial society, in contrast, it seems to me that the ideology of state socialism, that is what has become of Bolshevism and state capitalism. The modern welfare states are regressive and highly inadequate social theories, and a large number of our really fundamental problems stem from a kind of incompatibility and inappropriateness of these dominant social forms to modern industrial societies. And he sees greater demands being placed on the state because four major collective insecurity. So what are these? So these are the terrorism, economic globalization, leading problems such as outsourcing and pressures towards downsizing, as well as the current economic crisis, threats to national identity due to immigration, and the spread of global disease such as AIDS. As a result, extremist groups now have unparalleled internet access to the broader public, allowing for more efficient and effective recruiting instigation, and propaganda, as well as the purchase of weapons and unregulated money transfer. Both state and non-state actors can use all enable deep learning to create deep fakes, which creates ostensibly real footage of people speaking words they never said and have the potential to fuel misinformation, divisions, and political instability. As a result, the cost of illegal activity falls relative to the cost of legal activity, and the overall level of terrorism rises. Economic globalization, on the other hand, refers to the rising interconnectedness of the world economies as a result of increased cross-border trade in goods and services. International capital flows and the wide and rapid diffusions of technologies. Economic globalization can be seen in agreements like the North American Free Trade Agreement and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And their goal is to improve the efficiency of business while also contributing significantly to the growth of each country's economy. And one of their biggest issues is high investment costs. Multinational firms face problems in terms of capital investment and leadership as a result of globalization. Setting up a firm in a new country, especially one in the developing world, necessitates a significant amount of upfront money. It's possible that necessary infrastructure isn't in place. The issue of outsourcing and demand to downsizing will be discussed next. But first, let's define outsourcing. So, outsourcing is a commercial technique in which a company hires a third party to perform services or make commodities that were previously performed in-house by the company's own employees and personnel. Like for example is the Alibaba, Skype, and WhatsApp are just a few examples. Now, so downsizing is a common organizational practice, usually associated with economic downturns and falling businesses. It is the permanent reduction of a company's labor force through the elimination of unproductive workers or divisions. And some of the reason why a company downsizes are because of the recession. A corporation may be forced to downsize in order to stay afloat or sustain profitability due to poor economic conditions. So like for example, I get fired on my job. It's because the company I work in are already to the verge of bankruptcy. So alternatively, if a company industry is experiencing a crisis owing to technology or other issues, cutting expenses may be necessarily, that's what I've said. People who connect with their country in an ethnic cultural sense are more hostile to immigration than people who identify with their country. In a civic national sense, immigration is frequently viewed as a threat, posing a harm to everything from national security to the welfare state and jobs. Because of the fluidity of globalization, many foreigners travel to the other nations as tourists and aware that they are infected with disease such as HIV or AIDS. These diseases are contagious, so they can spread without your knowledge because they haven't fully developed their medicine. This is a threat to a nation. Further, the state does not merely respond to these threats. It may actually find in its interest to exaggerate or even create dangers and thereby makes its citizen more insecure. A good example is the US and British government arguments prior to the 2003 war with Iraq that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, or what we call these WMDs, that posed a direct threat to the US and Great Britain. The US even claimed that Iraq could kill millions by using an offshore ship to load canister containing lethal, chemical, or biological material into American cities. The collective insecurity created by such outrageous claims helped foster public opinion in favor of invading Iraq and overthrowing Saddam Hussein. The other side of this argument in support of the nation-state is that global processes of various kinds are just not as powerful as many believe. A global process is something that affects a large portion of the world. This is opposed to a local or national process, which is geographically contained to a much smaller area. An example of a global process is a pandemic. The global economy is retreating from the global economic integration as a result of the COVID-19 epidemic. Policymakers and corporate leaders are increasingly debating whether global supply chains have become too strained. They are also debating whether they should minimize their economic independence in an environment when alliances are shaky and international collaboration is lacking. Concerns about national security and public health are creating fresh justifications for protectionism, particularly in the medical and food industries, as well as a focus on domestic sourcing. This retreat will not spell the end of globalization, which has reached unprecedented heights. Globalization, on the other hand, can be partially reversed. The Great Recession of 2008-10 was a watershed moment in the global economy's degree of integration. As a result of the current health and economic crisis, officials appear set to take purposeful action to strengthen the globalization movement. Globalization's economic expansion may be slowed or reversed as a result of these actions, whereas new trade restrictions may develop, causing damage that could take decades to repair. Another example is global businesses fails in comparison to businesses within many countries, including the US. For another, some question the porosity of the nation-state by pointing, for example, to the fact that migration to the US and other countries has declined substantially since its heights in the late 19th and early 20th century, said by Gilpin. So, a related point is that it would be a mistake simply to see globalization as a threat to a constraint on the nation-state. It can also be an opportunity to the nation-state by calmly. For example, the demands of globalization were used as a basis to make needed changes, at least from a neoliberal point of view in Australian society, specifically allowing it to move away from protectionism into the direction of the new liberalization to transform state enterprises into the private enterprises and to streamline social welfare. In this, the rhetoric of globalization, especially an exaggeration of it and its effects, was useful to those politicians who were desirous of such changes. In other words, Australian politicians used globalization as an ideology in order to reform Australian society. Whether or not it is being superseded by globalization, the nation-state remains important. In thinking about the nation-state, especially in the era of globalization, we need to understand that it is not a natural phenomenon, but is rather a social and political construction. This means that the nation-state had to be literally created, as for example, the early leaders of the United States did in fusing the original independent states into a unified nation-state. It also means that the nation-state has to be defined by those within it, as well as those without. As such an entity, this can occur in various ways, but one of the key ideas in thinking about the unification of the nation-state is Benedict Anderson's notion of imagined communities. So, who is Benedict Anderson? Anderson is a political scientist, most known for his 1983 book Imagined Communities, in which he detailed the fundamental elements that contributed to the rise of nationalism in the world over the previous 3 centuries. A nation, according to Anderson, is an imagined political community that is both intrinsically restricted and sovereign. So, Anderson defines the nation as an imagined political community. Clearly, this means that for Anderson, a nation exists primarily within the realm of ideas, subjectively within people's mind as an image. Anderson attributed 4 characteristics to an imagination. First, it is imagined because it is impossible in all but the smallest communities to have face-to-face contact with more than a few or one's peer. Because there are at least some, and likely many, not available for personal contact. One must imagine who they are, what they believe, what holds them together, and so on. Second, it is imagined to be limited, because even the largest of them, encompassing perhaps 1 billion living human beings, has finite if elastic boundaries, beyond which lie other nations. No nation imagines itself as coterminous with mankind. Third, the nation-state is imagined to be sovereign, that is as being free. Finally, it is imagined to be a community, because regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail in each, the nation is always conceived as deep, horizontal comradeship. Imagined communities are individuals that thought they may never come into contact with the vast majority of the group's other members. All self-identify under a shared community identity. Their identity hasn't been shown or recognized by other individuals or the majority of people living in the same community, but through concept or imagination, it made them belong to that nation. The best example here is the Rizalian. Though Rizalian are known in the Pitans Rizal hometown. So Rizalian those are the people who believe Rizal as their god. Still, some individuals don't even have had any ideas what this population of individuals looks like, because they also behave just like the majority groups of community, and some rumors say that they always wear white. However, some of them don't. Even I, who hasn't taken a glance of them, wonder how they look like, how they behave, and how they interact with someone. Therefore, they are the best description of imagined communities. Anderson sees the 18th century as the beginning of the dawn of the nation, in the sense that he defines it as nationalism, and he links it to 2 key developments: the modern novel and the modern newspaper, which he includes under the heading of print capitalism. Key to the modern novel was the idea of an actor moving calendarically through homogeneous empty time. He sees this as a precise analog of the idea of nation, which also is conceived as a solid community moving steadily down or up history. So, the novel tended to have a national imagination as well as imagination of the characters moving through the sociological landscape presented in them. In the case of the newspaper, the reader also has a sense that what appears in its page operates calendarically. This is the case when once read about a community, say the refuge in Darfur, for several days in a row. However, it is also the case when the story disappears from the newspaper for a time. The reader assumes that the Darfur community continues to move along and thus has little trouble picking up the story. Note that similarity to a novel and its storyline. So, when articles once again are published on Darfur, in addition, large numbers of people buy and read the newspaper on a given day, and a given reader imagines that she is part of the larger community that is reading the same stories. So, it was the mass sale and distribution of novels and newspaper that was critical to the rise of imagination. It was also important that they were produced not in the language of the elites, like Latin, or in many different vernaculars, but in a limited number of print languages. It was through this that people who previously could not understand one another gradually became aware of hundreds of thousands, even millions of people in their particular language field. And at the same time that only those hundreds of thousands or millions so belonged these fellow readers to whom they were connected through print formed in their secular, particular, visible invisibility, the embryo of the national imagined community. Print capitalism also gave a new fixity to language that helped give solidity and long-term continuity to the notion of the nation. However, while a national print language was important historically, that does not mean that today's nation, as well as nation states and print language, are coterminous. Clearly, various languages exist within a given nation state. India encompasses many different languages, and languages stretch far beyond the borders of given nation states. People in many countries speak French. So, Mr. Anderson played a big part in nationalism by using, or rather linking, the novel and newspaper as a print capitalism. To be speaking frankly, it was indeed a brilliant idea of Anderson to do that, since, in terms of novel and newspaper, people get hooked on it quite easily, cause it previous knowledge, entertainment, encourage creativity for readers, and the best part is that large number of people buy and read the newspaper on a given day, and given reader imagines that she is part of the larger community that is reading the same stories. Also, with the mass production sales of both novels and newspaper, they made it possible that not only the privileged people would be qualified to understand manufactured product, but the nation itself would be able to. Same with print capitalism, they put it in a good position to use it to the solidity of the long-term notion of the nation. The imagined community is clearly a much greater reality than ever before because of developments far beyond print capitalism and not dealt with by Anderson. I am thinking here of a new digital media, especially cell phones, emails, the internet, blogs, and etc. that allow widely dispersed population to maintain, create, and disseminate a continuing sense of imagined community. Globalization has not only meant the dispersal of many people, but it also has provided them with newer technologies that allow them to be part of truly or global imagined communities. Thus, although the nation-state itself may be of declining importance, it may be as important, and in fact more important today in the age of globalization, as an imagined reality. Indeed, because of the introduction of technologies and social websites that allow people to interact with one another, which makes sense for the imagined community by Anderson. So, in globalization, because before the introduction of technology, it was hard to people who didn't know belong to our community to communicate and even know their existence. culture, and tradition. Therefore, because of globalization, it even emphasizes the ideal community, which is the imagined community.